What exactly are the Buffalo Bills getting in wide receiver Trent Sherfield? I studied his tape and I'm ready to talk about it today on Locked On Bills.
You are Locked On Bills, your daily Buffalo Bills podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Bills Mafia? It's Joe Marino, author of Go Bills and Buffalo's Run, also the co-host of the Locked On NFL Scouting podcast, and I am your host of Locked On Bills. I want to thank you for making Locked On Bills your first listen every day, and please be sure to subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Ultimate Football GM. Have you ever dreamed of becoming an NFL GM? Well, this game is definitely for you. To download the game, just visit ultimate-gm.com or look it up on the app stores. Our listeners get a 100% free boost to their franchise when using promo code LOCKEDON in the game. Well, folks, today is all about Trent Sherfield, the Bills' newest addition to the wide receiver core. And so we're going to do 3 segments on him. The first will be my presentation of Trent Sherfield after studying his tape this morning. Then in segment 2, we're going to talk to Kyle Krabs of Locked On Dolphins for his opinions on Sherfield and how he sees things going with the Buffalo Bills based on what he learned about him last year with the Miami Dolphins. And then lastly, I want to talk about the overall status of the Bills wide receiver core with this addition, what it means and how I think it all stacks up, and some of the clues that the addition of both Trent Sherfield and Deontay Hardy give us about what the offense could look like and what the utilization will be. Now, also, I fully acknowledge that the Bills signed free agent running back Damian Harris, and we're going to give him the full treatment in our next episode. So today is all about Trent Sherfield. Our next episode, all about Damian Harris. So let's do it. Let's talk Trent Sherfield, who the Bills signed to a 1-year deal. We don't know the terms of the deal at this point. We just know that it's for 1 season. Sherfield's 27 years old. He just turned 27 back in February towards the end of the month. So this will be his age 27 season. His verified measurements are 6'0", 203 pounds, 31 7/8 inch arms, 9 5/8 inch hands. So he's got good size. That's pretty much ideal height, weight, big hands, decent arm length. He's slapped together quite well. His verified athletic test, 4.45 40-yard dash, a 4.20 short shuttle, 6'9" 3-cone, 32.5-inch vertical jump, 10'5" broad jump, and 19 bench press reps of 225 pounds. That equals an RAS score of an 8.89, which is really good. Perfect is 10. Anything above 8 is really, really good. And he's very close to 9. So he's got really good size-adjusted athleticism. His 40, his bench, his broad jump, those are all tests that are above average. His shuttle and 3 cones are average, and his vertical jump is below average, but, I mean, it's kind of weird, actually, that it's 32.5. You'd expect probably another 5 inches to that total based on where the other numbers came in. Sherfield's an undrafted free agent in 2018 out of Vanderbilt. Started his career with the Arizona Cardinals, made the team as an undrafted free agent out of camp, had a strong preseason, and earned a job on their roster. And he spent his first 3 seasons with the Cardinals, so 2018, 19, and 20. And then in 2021, he went to the 49ers, where he was with Mike McDaniel, who then went to the Miami Dolphins in 2022, and Sherfield came with him. And obviously 2022 with Miami was his most productive season. Now he's with the Buffalo Bills for his 6th campaign in the NFL. Like I mentioned, his most productive season was last year in Miami, was their 3rd leading wide receiver after Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. Had 30 catches for 417 yards and 2 touchdowns. Last year, his alignments were basically 50-50 between in the slot and playing outside. And he's had some seasons that skewed more heavily towards the slot and some towards the outside. And so I think the important thing to know there is that he's got experience at both slot receiver and outside receiver. And in Miami, he was used with a lot of motion, and we'll talk about that in just a moment. Some other statistics I want to mention on Trent Sherfield. Number one is his yards after catch per reception last year was 4.7. That's a really average number. There's things that he does well after the catch. We'll talk about that in a moment, but this isn't a guy that you look at and say, yeah, this is a dynamic yards after catch guy. He's physical and competitive, but he's not a guy that you throw him the ball and he's this dangerous dude that's going to rip off chunks of yards. He's got a drop rate of 3.2%, which is absolutely outstanding from 2022. And then his drop rate for his career is 6.9%. He's only got 2 drops on 77 targets over the last 3 years. And so he's very consistent with his hands, and that shows up on tape, which we'll talk about in just a moment. And then the last number I want to present to you is his contested catch rate. He's 14 of 27 for his career, which is right at 52%, winning in contested situations. So I studied his tape on Tuesday morning, and I think his best traits are as follows. First of all, hands and body control. He's got really strong, secure, and confident hands. He makes excellent adjustments to the football. And so whether it's scooping out low throws, adjusting to high throws, working back across his frame, he can catch the football, which speaks to not only his hands, but really good body control. And you've seen him make some really tough sideline catches where there's just good control and awareness and outstanding hands to be able to make those types of catches. He's unbothered by traffic around him, and he's really fearless when he has an opportunity to catch the football. You can really feel in his game tape how competitive he is and the chip that he has on his shoulders after being an undrafted free agent and making an NFL roster from day one and never having to be on a practice squad. And that's something he's quite proud of and made sure everybody knew that during his press conference on Monday afternoon. I love his ability to adjust to zone coverage and make himself available. I think he's got strong spatial awareness, does well to find leverage and adjust. So we talk about that ability to read coverage, find space, make yourself available, be quarterback friendly. I think you get that when you watch Trent Sherfield work against zone coverage. So he's a good zone beater. I like the versatility, can play inside and outside. He can find space quickly as a route runner when adjusting to zone, and he's got some ability to push vertical and win down the field with his size, his athleticism, and his hands and ball skills. Extremely physical football player. Yards after catch, you'll see him be more than willing to take on contact and compete. Not a guy that's super shifty or elusive or has that make you miss ability with consistency, but he's willing to be physical with you. He'll lower his shoulder. He'll compete for every yard that he can get. His physicality shows up as a blocker, and this is one of the best assets that he brings to the table, is his ability to block. And Miami wasn't shy about using him as a blocker, whether that was as an insert blocker, kind of motioning him into all the big bodies and asking him to block a linebacker, or motioning him and having him lead block on perimeter runs. He's very good at blocking, and his size, strength, his body control really shows up in that regard. It's not easy to connect with a moving target in space, but Trent Sherfield does very well to do that. And I think it comes from all of those physical attributes, but also just a strong understanding of where to be, right? How to connect with those moving targets, angles, right? That's something that some people either have it or they don't. And you could tell he's got a good understanding of angles. So the blocking is a huge component of what he offers. And then, of course, special teams. He's a proven special teams player for phases. For Miami, I thought he really excelled as a jammer on the punt return team and as a personal protector on the punt team. So you're going to get a lot of value out of this player in special teams, in blocking, and then, of course, being a ancillary component of your offense, and then just he's super competitive. Those are all the things that you love about him. Now, when it comes to concerns, first of all, I would start with him not being a player that I think is a great separator against man coverage. So if corners are going to play right on top of him, try to mirror and match, they're pretty tight to him. Not a really dynamic route runner where he's really going to set you up with his release, manipulate you with his stem and bend it and get open. Now, he makes good adjustments. He can find leverage. He can do things that are helpful. But if you're going to put a top-tier man coverage corner on top of him, I think he's going to be able to lock him down. So that's definitely something to be mindful of. I think you also have to be realistic about his role in the production. A lot of his value next year for the Bills, I don't think you'll be able to measure it. You're not going to be able to say, oh, Trent Sherfield was awesome for the Bills. He caught 65 passes for 750 yards and 6 touchdowns. I think he'll have some production, probably around 30 catches, something like that, I think would be pretty reasonable. But his value is going to come as a blocker. His value is going to come on special teams. And so a lot of his production won't be measurable with receptions, yards, and touchdowns. And also just being mindful that he's 27 years old. That he's not an old player by any means, but he's unlikely to suddenly become a volume receiver. That's probably not in the cards for him. Now, if there's a bunch of injuries and he gets pushed up the depth chart, well, then he has to. But in a situation where everyone's healthy, I don't think you're looking at him as a big-time volume piece of your offense, and he's likely a wide receiver 5. Now, he's a valuable wide receiver 5, but a wide receiver 5. And so coming up in segment 3, we're going to talk a little bit more about that wide receiver depth chart and how I see things kind of fitting together right now. But coming up next, we're going to talk to Kyle Krabs of Locked On Dolphins for his perspective on Trent Sherfield. But first, need to tell you about FanDuel. The NCAA tournament is heating up, and now is the perfect time to download FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because new customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win. Just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Then you can bet on everything from the money line to point scores and threes drained, and there is no better sportsbook to place your bets than FanDuel. Plus, I love this. FanDuel even lets you combine your bets for a chance at a bigger payout with a same-game parlay. So don't miss the chance to get your no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets back when you go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. I'm joined now by Kyle Krabs, the outstanding host of the Locked On Dolphins podcast. I heard you had a new podcast as well, Locked On NFL Scouting. The co-host, not that great, but you really carry the show. Hey, Kyle joins us here to talk about Trent Sherfield, the most recent addition to the Buffalo Bills wide receiver corps. Kyle, thanks for hopping on with me, man.
Yeah, I'm a little confused. I was told we were just going to be recording Locked On NFL Scouting, and then I came in with the banner, and this is very clearly not my home turf here. So it's good to be on with you, as we are daily on Locked On NFL Scouting, but on Locked On Bills to tell Bills fans a little bit about one of your new players who is, I think, an outstanding signing that is very quickly going to ingratiate himself to Bills fans.
I appreciate that. I enjoyed listening to him yesterday during his press conference and him really talking about how he came into the league as a UDFA, and he said, you know what? Hadn't been on a practice squad yet. This guy with a lot of confidence. You could tell he does all the little things when it comes to playing wide receiver. So let's get into it. I really want to talk about just his start in Miami. He comes to the Dolphins after 1 year with Mike McDaniel in San Francisco. And then based on salary, you kind of think that Cedric Wilson's going to be the number 3 receiver. But it winds up being Trent Sherfield, who was the most targeted Dolphins receiver, not named Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle. So what kind of led to him earning more market share than at least I expected?
All of the things that are not involved in being a pass catcher, ironically. You think about the Dolphins and what their offense was last year, and they had a bunch of tight ends who can't block. So a lot of their success in the run game came from running to the weak side of the formational strength, which led to a receiver being who was cracking down on linebackers or stepping up onto safeties. And that was Trent Sherfield. He's the most physical receiver that the Dolphins had. By far, he was a better blocker than Mike Gesicki in the slot and on the edge of the formational strength. And that allowed him to be on the field and kind of be a tendency breaker, where when Gesicki was on the field, the Dolphins passed the ball 77% of the times with snaps that Gesicki took, where Sherfield took a lot of snaps in the slot. He and Gesicki shared about an equal amount of snaps in the slot, but the Dolphins offense was much more versatile when Sherfield was on the field because of the little things, the nitty gritty things, the willingness to block, the willingness to be unselfish and do all the blue collar things for a wide receiver that you would expect for a guy who wasn't highly regarded and had to fight, scratch, claw to make his way onto a 53-man roster. That's kind of been ingrained in who he is. And those were the things that allowed him to get on the field and then magically be put in a position to, okay, teams are going to take away Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle as best as they can with a lot of extra attention. Who's the other receiver that's on the field? It's Trent Sherfield.
Well, I'm through 2 games as of the recording this podcast. I've done Cleveland and Minnesota.
Cleveland was a good one.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I've enjoyed both. And it really feels like his opportunity in the passing game came from the run blocking. Like you mentioned, they motioned him a ton.
Yep.
It felt like in using him as an insert blocker and a lead blocker off tackle in space. They weren't shy about tapping into that. And then there was some passing concepts that I saw kind of baked in off of some of those motions. And so let me kind of frame it like this, because if I had Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill, I throw the ball to them all the time too, right? Like I don't take anything away from their market share. They deserve all the targets. But as I thought a lot more about the Dolphins offense last year, I thought about, well, if they could get some of these ancillary components going a little bit more, I think this offense can be even better. So how do you think Trent Sherfield contributed and maybe didn't contribute into maybe taking even more away from Hill and Waddle?
Yeah, I think it was a game late in the season, but Miami goes up to Buffalo and plays on Saturday night, and Trent drops a touchdown pass down in the red zone. And, there were a couple of missed opportunities that I think really encapsulated kind of the ceiling for putting too much volume into Trent's game. He is a complementary type player. But I largely think his best qualities are accentuated when he is serving in a complementary role, and can serve as a tendency. I don't want to say tendency breaker, but he's tendency ambiguous. He can be on the field for passing downs. He can be on the field for rushing downs. And you're not giving away your intentions by Trent Sherfield being on the field. I think separation consistency in man-to-man coverage was something that the Dolphins didn't get a ton of man-to-man coverage because of Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle and how teams were choosing to defend the field. But when teams bracketed those two players and gave them contact at the line of scrimmage and put extra defenders over top of them, and you had a lot of extra spacing elsewhere on the field, if they chose to man in those situations, separation for all of the ancillary pieces, like you mentioned, Joe, was not easy to come by. And I think the lack of separation in those man-to-man and one-on-one type situations, in addition to letting a couple opportunities slip through his fingers, were the two things that probably best embodied why Trent was a complementary piece and the third most targeted receiver on the team, but not a player that bore more fruit than what he did for the Dolphins.
I think that makes a lot of sense. I know his splits really skewed towards almost literally all of his production coming against zone coverage. Yeah. And you could see he's a smart player that knew how to take advantage of some of the spacing that was available to him. But yes, I would agree with you that I didn't see the same separation ability against man coverage, which certainly speaks to exactly what I was hoping you would say there, because we see it the same way when it comes to Sherfield. When he does win as a receiver, we talked about the grittiness. We talked about
he's tough as nails, man.
All that stuff. What is it? What's the best things about Sherfield as a wide receiver?
You're going to work to get this guy on the ground. There was a play, I think it was against Houston, that was negated for a penalty? It was either against Houston or Cleveland.
There was a big catch and run against Cleveland where he bounced off two guys and spun off and ripped off like 20 more yards.
And that came back on an offensive holding, I believe. Either offensive holding or illegal man downfield was the penalty, I believe. But the physical, special teams demon, first and foremost, he's the personal protector in the kicking game. Bills fans should know him well because it was his butt cheek that the punt went off of at the end of the week 3 contest. So he plays teams, and all of that is embodied in just when you have to get him down, he's got good contact balance. He's fearless with the ball in his hands. He relishes in those opportunities. to make plays in the passing game in the same way that he relishes cracking on a linebacker and creating a big seal. So passionate player, energetic player, kind of your quintessential blue collar wide receiver. In a perfect world, he's probably your wide receiver 4, right? Yeah. He's probably not the other outside wide receiver, and ideally you get a little bit of a better separator to play in the slot with consistency. But if he's your 4 and you want to have some ambiguity there as far as what your intentions are on passing versus running downs, he can play meaningful snaps for you. He could probably play 30 snaps a game, 25, 30 snaps a game plus special teams. And you're going to get a guy who, when the stars align with the defensive call and leverage and a chance to touch the football, he ain't going down easy. And he's going to challenge smaller guys to get him on the ground.
I focused a lot on special teams when watching him, and you mentioned that he was the personal protector and punt, which I guess was somewhat of a surprise to me that he wasn't a gunner, but it looks like 20 and 27 were the 2 gunners. Was that more about him being best in that protector role, or is 20 and 27 really good at gunning?
The Dolphins special teams didn't have a lot that went well for it last year, but I would say the gunners on the punt team was one of the more appealing, whether it was Justin Bethel, it was Keon Crossan, who got paid over $3 million per season to play special teams and be a special teams player. He just got pressed into defensive reps because the Dolphins lost 7 corners before the season even started.
Is that all? I thought there was like 15.
Yeah, it might be 15. I lost count. Elijah Campbell's another player who, especially in 2021, showed some really good promise on the kicking game, and they replaced Mac Hollins. So they kind of had an opening, and all these DB types kind of swelled into that role. But I would say Trent was an upgrade over the guy who had played that spot the last couple of seasons, which was Clayton Fejedelem, who was a $3 million a year special teams player as a backup safety. And Trent was an obvious upgrade, in my opinion, over Clayton in that personal protector role.
I thought he did a good job as the jammer on the punt return unit at times as well, from my exposures to this point. Let's ask about why he didn't come back with the Miami Dolphins. It certainly sounded like he wanted to. Some familiarity with Mike McDaniel a couple of seasons. Maybe it was about swapping him for Berrios for the return role. What are your thoughts on why he wasn't retained?
I think there's 2 names to invoke here. One of them is Braxton Berrios. Got a 1-year, $3.5 million deal with the Dolphins from Miami. Played his football at University of Miami. One of the better return specialists in the game over the last 2-3 seasons. Miami was woefully bad. They put Javon Holland back there. They put Tyreek Hill back there. They put Jalen Waddle back there. They put all their star players back there, but they were always kind of hesitant to, it was almost a guaranteed fair catch on punts. They had very little in the return game. Their starting field position really suffered as a result of that. So getting Berrios, and then additionally talking about separation ability in the slot, and Braxton Berrios as being a more dynamic separator when teams are going to commit 3.5 defenders to defending Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle, and you get one-on-one situations across the board and needing somebody to win one-on-ones. I certainly think Berrios is a significant improvement over Trent Sherfield in those situations. And the other name is Eric Ezukama, who the team drafted in the 4th round of last year's NFL draft out of Texas Tech. The team talked quite a bit about how he effectively redshirted the entire year. He dressed against the Jets in Week 18 for the first time due to the entire Texas Tech offense being hand signals for play calls versus this is not a hand signal offense with Mike McDaniel. There's a lot of volume. There's a lot of responsibilities. There's a lot of site adjustments and changes made from the call in the huddle to what is executed at the line of scrimmage based on defensive leverage and personnel and game situation, so on and so forth. So Eric Ezukama having kind of the redshirt season to grow and develop into that role as a big-bodied physical player who they're hoping can take some of those rundown roles from Trent Sherfield's plate. I think kind of gave you 2 players, one who had been in the system and the other one who was an obvious upgrade on special teams for being able to do more in an area that the Dolphins were more hurting. That led to Sherfield not getting an extra opportunity with the Dolphins this year.
Kyle, the last one for you here is just your general thoughts on projecting him to the Buffalo Bills and their offense. I think he's going to be the wide receiver 5, with Deontay Hardy being the 4. And so kind of for the Bills, at least the Jake Kumerow type role that he's filled over the last few seasons. It feels like that's the plan here for Sherfield. And so your general thoughts on his skill set, your familiarity with the Bills and how that's going to go.
Yeah. I would certainly say if you're looking through the same lens of the Bills' ideal roles offensively and having a shifty type in the slot, and obviously the team parting ways with Isaiah McKenzie. So whoever fills that slot role, I don't think that's Trent's best role. I think he can compete for the wide receiver 4 spot. Now, if they go out and they get another dynamic player and Gabe Davis is, I don't want to say demoted, but he's pushed down on the depth chart, I think they're very different type of players where I think Gabe winning vertically down the field, good ball skills, big body down the field type player, that's not really Trent's game. So I think they would have to complement each other a little bit more. But he'll play, I wouldn't put it past Trent to play on all 4 special teams units. And as the Bills try to find the best balance for their traditional running game, I think Trent can be a really helpful player. I know the team trended a little bit more towards heavier personnel sets in 2022 than they had in previous seasons, where they were previously very 10 heavy under Brian Daboll. I do think Trent Sherfield can kind of bring some of that element of personnel flexibility that could help Buffalo be a little bit more balanced than have to skew all the way towards heavier personnel sets to be able to run the ball or to want to run the ball, and lighter personnel sets to pass the ball with the effectiveness that they have for quite some time.
He's Kyle Krabs on Twitter at Grinding the Tape, host of Locked On Dolphins, co-host of Locked On NFL Scouting. Thanks for joining me, my guy.
Thanks, Joe.
Coming up in just a moment is going to be my overall thoughts on the status of the wide receiver core right now. But first, today's episode is brought to you by Ultimate Football GM. If you like team building, which you probably do if you like listening to this podcast, we really focus on team building, then you have to check out Ultimate Football GM. When you play Ultimate Football GM, you get to control and manage every aspect of your franchise as you try to build a dynasty. With Ultimate Football GM, you're responsible for controlling and directing your franchise by hiring the right coaches and coordinators, managing the finances, including negotiating player salaries and terms. You have to deal with free agency, the draft, injuries, personnel issues, all the ups and downs of a season, and all of this in a challenging and realistic game world. Ultimate Football GM is completely free and playable offline, on the go, as you want and when you want to. Locked On Bills listeners can get a 100% free boost to their franchise when using promo code Locked On in the game store. That's Locked On, so make sure to check it out today. To download the game, again, just visit ultimate-gm.com or look it up on the app stores. That's ultimate-gm.com. Ultimate Football GM. Start your dynasty today. All right, let's close out our podcast today by just examining the status of this wide receiver core, because I think it's starting to take shape. There's been a couple of additions here in Deontay Hardy and Trent Sherfield. The Bills have said goodbye to Isaiah McKenzie, who is now on the Indianapolis Colts, and we'll certainly talk about some of these players that are on the move. Jaquan Johnson's on the Raiders, Devin Singletary with the Texans. So we'll certainly spend some time here in the next few days reflecting on their new opportunities. But the 2023 Buffalo Bills wide receiver core is starting to take shape. Stefon Diggs, clearly your number 1 receiver. Gabriel Davis, your number 2 receiver. And doesn't matter what I think of Gabriel Davis or anyone else thinks. Clearly, Brandon Beane and Sean McDermott believe in Gabe Davis as this team's number 2 receiver. So I think he's very firmly the 2 right now. The 3 receiver, kind of your slot player, I think is right now Khalil Shakir. And what's interesting about him is, obviously, I'm excited about him. I love the skill set. I love that he's a young player, year 2. But when Sean McDermott was asked about adding to the receiver core at the combine, he was very quick to be like, I like Khalil Shakir. And so I know that it's a bit risky to have him as your potential number 3, given he's got 10 catches so far in the NFL. But he's a player that I think can really add a lot to this offense next year. Deontay Hardy, your number 4. Trent Sherfield, your number 5. And then some practice squad type players in Keyshawn Johnson, Isaiah Coulter, and Desmond Patton. You'll probably roster 1 more wide receiver. So I think there's very realistically space for 1 more guy. And if the right player's there in the first round of the draft, I think the Bills could very easily draft them and that player could immediately become the featured slot. That player can immediately add to what Gabe Davis brings and could be the successor to Gabe Davis. The Bills don't bring him back after this season. So there's certainly room to add here. And I think the Bills should, right? You should get another young player in the mix here. And I anticipate that will happen. But how much market share is that player really going to command in year one? So we'll see how that goes. Obviously, Jake Kumerow, a contract that's expired. He's a free agent right now. He could be re-signed. He could sign with the Jets if they get Aaron Rodgers and all that comes together. But I think Trent Sherfield really replaces what they had in Jake Kumerow, because Jake Kumerow was the blocker and this big-bodied guy that can sometimes win down the field. Well, Trent Sherfield's certainly a great blocker, has more down the field ability, in my opinion, and just a more overall skill set to play receiver, more versatility in just about every capacity. Now, Jake Kumerow is a good gunner and can really get down the field on kicks and punts. So can Trent Sherfield. So I really look at Trent Sherfield as an upgrade to that Jake Kumerow role. But as this all kind of works together, I can see if Khalil Shakir is the featured slot, well, some of that might be absorbed by Deontay Hardy. So I kind of look at Shakir and Hardy as your 3-4 combo. And then I look at Hardy and Sherfield as my 4-5 combo. And I like the complementary skill sets here. I like how this all comes together. Now, you don't have another like dude outside of Diggs. I mean, this isn't Waddle and Hill. This isn't Higgins and Chase, right? That's not what exists here. But I think you have a lot of depth and you have a lot of complementary skill sets. Now, what I will say about these new additions, when I think about Deontay Hardy, Trent Sherfield, what I think you can gather by considering those two players is you get a lot of versatility. I think both players can play inside and outside. They can both attack all levels of the field, and they both add considerable special teams value. Now, in different ways. Hardy, your return guy. Sherfield, the guy that can block and cover kicks and punts. But both players very, very clearly to me have good hands. That was a major strength of both players. If you think about the presentations that I did on both of these guys, they're both really, really talented catchers of the football in terms of catching the ball. So drops were kind of an issue for the Bills last year. And Davis was guilty. McKenzie was guilty. Diggs was guilty. Probably the worst season for Diggs when it comes to drops. And I think you've really elevated your overall hands. The catching skills of your receivers have been upgraded by adding Sherfield and Hardy to the mix. The other thing that I'll mention here about this receiver core is it's taking form. We've considered the idea of the Bills leaning into more 12 personnel, 2 tight end sets. But I would say that these personnel moves, adding Hardy and adding Sherfield, and nothing at tight end. So right now you have Dawson Knox, Quentin Morris, end of list. That's your tight end room right now. This to me is a indicator that you're leaning more into 3+ wide receiver sets than you are 2 tight end sets. That's what this says to me. It says that, hey, we like Trent Sherfield. We're going to put him on the field, and he brings value as a blocker, and we're going to run more out of spread. We like his ability as an insert blocker to provide value in that capacity, but also we can trust him to catch passes as well. You're less predictable. If you put Jake Kumerow on the field over the last 2 years for the Bills, you knew that was a run play. With Trent Sherfield, I think you're less predictable by personnel. So to me, these moves tell me that there's more 3+ wide receiver sets coming than there are 2+ tight end sets coming. Just an interesting takeaway that I've had to this point. Now, the Bills could draft the tight end pretty high and blow up this entire conversation, or they could sign a tight end and make me think differently. But based on the information we have right now, that's what I'm thinking about the direction of this offense. So there you have it. Trent Sherfield. Bills New wide receiver, intriguing addition. I think you have to look at him through the right lens, and if you do, you can really appreciate the skill set and value that he's going to bring to the table. Tomorrow, it's all about Damian Harris. We'll break him down just like we have all the other acquisitions. Connor McGovern, Deontay Hardy, Trent Sherfield, Damian Harris coming up next. So make sure you don't miss anything. Be sure that you're subscribed. Would love it if you took a second to rate, review, share the podcast. Have a great rest of your day. Go Bills. And I look forward to catching up with you again tomorrow.